There comes a moment in life when every strategy you've used to protect yourself, every wall you've built, every distance you've carefully maintained suddenly becomes powerless. And it doesn't happen with noise, it happens in silence. You see, some people move through life believing their strength comes from meeting no one. They master independence. They become experts at distance. They convince themselves that control equals safety. But life has a fascinating way of revealing truth. Because the heart was never designed for isolation. It was designed for connection. So the avoidant builds the walls, brick by brick, experience by experience. Maybe disappointment built one side, maybe betrayal built another, maybe fear poured the foundation. And for years, those walls work, until one day, someone walks into their life who doesn't attack the walls, doesn't demand entry, doesn't try to tear them down. They simply stand there with patience, presence, and authenticity. And something inside begins to shift, not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. The avoidant starts noticing something strange. They think about this person when they're not around. They feel calm when they hear their voice. They feel seen in ways they never expected. And suddenly the distance that once felt safe starts to feel empty. That is the moment. The exact moment an avoidant realizes they're in love isn't fireworks. It's recognition. Recognition that the one person they keep pulling away from is the one person they don't actually want to lose. It's the moment they realize their instinct to run is colliding with a deeper instinct to stay. And here's the deeper truth about human nature. Love doesn't destroy your strength. It reveals it. Real strength is not in protecting your heart from every risk. Real strength is having the courage to open your heart when everything in your past tells you not to. Because love is not weakness. Love is alignment. Alignment with the deepest truth of who we are as human beings. We were not created just to survive. We were created to connect, to grow, to experience life through shared meaning. And when that realization hits the avoidant person, something extraordinary happens. Their old identity begins to crumble. They realize that independence without connection is not freedom. It's loneliness disguised as control. And in that moment, they face a powerful choice: return to the walls or step into something greater than fear. Because love asks for something the avoidant has rarely practiced. Vulnerability. But vulnerability is not exposure. Vulnerability is courage in its purest form. It's the moment you say, yes, I've been hurt before, but I refuse to let the past dictate the size of my future. And when the avoidant finally understands this, when they stop seeing love as a threat and start seeing it as a gift, their entire life transforms. Because the greatest prison a person can live in is the illusion that they must face life alone. But the greatest freedom is realizing you don't have to. And the moment an avoidant recognizes that the one person who makes them feel alive, peaceful, and real is the same person they've been trying to keep at a distance, that is the moment their heart wakes up. Not because love arrived, but because they finally allowed themselves to feel it. And when that awakening happens, something powerful becomes possible. Not perfect love, not effortless love, but real love. The kind that transforms fear into courage, distance into connection, and two separate lives into a shared journey towards something bigger than either one alone. Because in the end, the strongest people are not the ones who avoid love. The strongest people are the ones brave enough to choose it. For a long time, the avoidant person believes that emotional distance is strength. Somewhere in their past, consciously or unconsciously, they learned that getting too close to people leads to pain, disappointment, or loss of control. So they develop a powerful strategy. Build walls before anyone can hurt them. These walls aren't always obvious. They show up as independence, emotional self-sufficiency, or the habit of keeping conversations safe and surface level. They become experts at appearing calm, capable, and untouchable. To the outside world, it looks like confidence, but inside it is often a carefully maintained system of protection. The walls serve a purpose. They give the avoidant person the feeling that they are in control of their emotional world. If no one gets too close, no one can disrupt their peace. If feelings stay contained, nothing becomes overwhelming. Over time, this pattern becomes automatic. They don't even realize they are guarding their heart anymore. It simply becomes part of who they are. But then something unexpected happens. Someone enters their life who doesn't trigger their usual defenses in the same way. This person doesn't chase aggressively, doesn't demand emotional exposure, and doesn't pressure them to open up before they are ready. Instead, they bring a steady presence, a quiet authenticity that feels different from anything the avoidant person has experienced before, and slowly, something begins to shift. At first, the change is subtle. The avoidant person may notice they are thinking about this person more than usual. They may feel an unfamiliar sense of calm in their presence. Conversations feel easier, more natural, less like something to escape from. For someone who is used to emotional distance, this experience can feel confusing. Their mind tries to categorize it as temporary or insignificant, but the feeling keeps returning. Then the cracks begin to appear in the emotional walls they have spent years building. The defenses that once worked so reliably start losing their strength. Pulling away no longer creates the same sense of relief it used to. In fact, distance from this particular person can start to feel uncomfortable, even unsettling. This is the moment when the avoidant person begins to realize that their protective system is no longer functioning the way it once did. What makes this moment powerful is that it challenges the avoidant's deepest belief, that closeness equals danger. Suddenly, closeness begins to feel safe, meaningful, and even necessary. The walls that once felt like protection begin to feel like barriers separating them from something valuable, and that realization can be both beautiful and terrifying. Inside them, two forces start to collide. One part of them still wants to maintain the familiar pattern of distance. That voice says, "Stay in control. Don't let anyone get too close." But another part, often quieter but growing stronger, recognizes that something real is happening. This new feeling doesn't resemble the threats they once feared. Instead, it feels grounding, warm, and strangely peaceful. The collapse of emotional walls rarely happens all at once. It happens through moments. Moments where they choose to stay a little longer in conversation. Moments where they allow themselves to share something personal. Moments where they realize they actually want the connection they once avoided. Each small moment weakens the old structure of emotional distance, and eventually, the avoidant person recognizes a truth that changes everything. The walls they built to protect their heart can no longer contain the feelings that have begun to grow inside it. For most of their life, the avoidant person has built their identity around independence. Independence becomes more than a lifestyle. It becomes a philosophy. They take pride in needing very little from others. They convince themselves that relying on someone else creates vulnerability, and vulnerability creates risk. So they become extremely self-reliant. They solve their own problems, regulate their own emotions, and keep their inner world mostly private. To them, independence equals safety. They learn to enjoy their own company, structure their life around personal freedom, and maintain relationships that allow plenty of space. If someone gets too close emotionally, their instinct is to create distance again. It's not necessarily because they dislike the person. It's because closeness activates a deep internal alarm that says, "You're losing control." Over time, this pattern becomes normal. They don't question it. In fact, they often believe this approach to life is healed, higher than emotional dependence. They see themselves as strong, rational, and composed. And for the most part, their system works until they encounter a connection that quietly disrupts it. At first, the shift is almost invisible. The avoidant person begins noticing that they want to spend more time with this particular individual. This is unusual because their default setting has always been space and autonomy. Yet somehow, the time spent together doesn't feel draining. It feels easy, natural, even energizing. This creates a strange internal experience. On one hand, their mind still values independence. They are used to making decisions without considering anyone else. They are used to living within their own emotional boundaries. But on the other hand, a new desire starts appearing, the desire for connection. The avoidant person may find themselves thinking about this person when they're alone, wondering how their day is going, or feeling an unexpected sense of anticipation before seeing them again. These are experiences they may not have allowed themselves to fully feel before. And because these feelings are unfamiliar, they can be both intriguing and unsettling. Gradually, they begin to realize something important. Connection does not automatically erase independence. In fact, being around the right person doesn't feel like losing freedom. Instead, it feels like gaining something meaningful without sacrificing who they are. This realization marks a powerful shift in perspective. The avoidant person starts seeing that independence and connection are not enemies. They can coexist. They can even strengthen each other. When the connection is healthy, it doesn't demand control or constant reassurance. It allows space while still creating closeness. As this awareness grows, the avoidant person starts choosing moments of connection more intentionally. They might reach out, first in a conversation, share a personal thought they would normally keep inside, or stay emotionally present instead of withdrawing when things become meaningful. Each of these choices represents a small step away from the old belief that distance equals safety. And with every step, the internal balance begins to change. The desire for connection slowly becomes stronger than the instinct to maintain distance. What once felt threatening now feels valuable. What once felt like a loss of control now feels like a meaningful expansion of life. In this transformation, the avoidant person begins discovering that independence was never meant to replace connection. It was only meant to protect them until they found a relationship where connection finally felt safe. For someone with avoidant tendencies, fear and love often exist in the same space, creating a powerful internal contradiction. On the surface, they may appear calm, composed, and emotionally controlled. But beneath that calm exterior, there is often a quiet struggle between two opposing forces: the natural human desire for connection and the deeply ingrained instinct to protect themselves from emotional risk. This is what creates the fear-love paradox. The avoidant person may begin to feel a genuine attachment to someone, yet the closer that person gets, the stronger the internal alarm can become. It's not because the connection is unhealthy or unwanted. In fact, the opposite is usually true. The deeper the bond begins to feel, the more significant the relationship becomes, and significance is exactly what activates fear. For years, the avoidant individual may have believed that staying emotionally distant was the best way to maintain stability in life. They developed habits that helped them avoid situations where their heart could become deeply involved. If something started to feel intense, they would create space. But if someone asked for emotional depth, they would shift the focus or retreat slightly. But when love begins to grow, these strategies stop working as smoothly as they once did. The avoidant person might notice something confusing happening inside them. They may feel drawn toward the person one moment and suddenly feel the urge to pull away the next. When they are close to this person, they might feel warmth, comfort, and a surprising sense of peace. Yet later, when they are alone, their mind might start questioning everything, wondering if things are moving too fast, if expectations will grow, or if emotional dependency might develop. This push and pull is not manipulation. It is the natural result of two powerful emotional forces colliding. One force says, "This connection matters, this person understands me. Being with them feels right." The other force whispers, "Be careful, if you let this go too far, you could get hurt." In many ways, the avoidant person becomes caught between their past and their present. Their past experiences taught them that emotional closeness can lead to disappointment, rejection, or loss of control. Their present experience, however, is showing them something very different: a relationship that feels safe, respectful, and genuine. Because of this conflict, the avoidant person may sometimes distance themselves even when they deeply care about the other person. They might become quieter, less expressive, or temporarily step back from the connection. From the outside, this behavior can appear confusing or contradictory, but internally, it is often a process of trying to manage overwhelming feelings that they have not fully learned how to handle. Yet the paradox also reveals something important. If fear appears when the connection deepens, it often means the relationship has reached a level of emotional importance that the avoidant person cannot easily dismiss. The very presence of fear signals that something real is at stake. Eventually, a moment arrives when the avoidant individual begins to recognize the truth behind their behavior. They realize that the person they keep creating distance from is the same person whose presence brings them the most comfort. The one they hesitate around is also the one whose absence they notice the most. And in that realization, the paradox becomes clear. The reason they feel afraid is not because the love is wrong, but because the love is real enough to matter. For much of their life, the avoidant person has learned to equate emotional restraint with strength. They believe that staying composed, guarded, and self-contained protects them from the chaos that emotions can sometimes bring. Vulnerability in their mind feels like stepping into uncertainty without armor, so they develop habits that allow them to keep their feelings fully managed and their inner world mostly hidden from others. Over time, this emotional control becomes part of their identity. They pride themselves on being logical, calm under pressure, and not easily overwhelmed by feelings. While others may openly express their emotions, the avoidant person often chooses observation instead of participation. They listen more than they reveal. They analyze more than they share. It feels safer this way. But when love begins to enter their life, something remarkable happens. Love doesn't operate according to the same rules that emotional distance once followed. Love naturally invites openness, honesty, and connection. And when someone truly meaningful appears in their life, the avoidant person slowly begins to encounter feelings that are more difficult to keep contained. At first, they may attempt to manage these emotions in the same way they always have, by maintaining control. They might limit how much they express, avoid discussing deeper feelings, or create space whenever the relationship starts to feel too intense. These strategies worked before, so it feels natural to rely on them again, yet something feels different this time. The connection with this person begins to create moments where emotional honesty feels less threatening than silence. Conversations may start touching deeper topics, dreams, fears, past experiences. The avoidant person may notice that when they share even a small piece of their inner world, the response they receive is not rejection or judgment, but understanding. That experience can be profoundly disarming. For someone who has spent years believing that vulnerability leads to pain, discovering that openness can lead to acceptance is transformative. It challenges an old belief system that has shaped many of their decisions and behaviors. Still, this awakening does not happen instantly. Vulnerability for the avoidant person often unfolds gradually through small choices rather than dramatic confessions. It might begin with admitting when they had a difficult day, sharing a personal memory they normally would keep private, or expressing appreciation in ways that once felt uncomfortable. Each moment of honesty becomes a quiet act of courage. Inside, the avoidant person may still feel uncertainty. Opening up can feel unfamiliar and risky, like stepping into emotional territory they have rarely explored. But alongside the uncertainty, they begin to experience something new: relief. The relief that comes from not having to hide every feeling. The relief that comes from being understood without needing to explain everything perfectly. As these experiences accumulate, the avoidant person starts realizing that vulnerability is not the weakness they once believed it to be. In fact, it requires far more strength to share your true thoughts and emotions than it does to keep them locked away. Love becomes the catalyst for this realization. The presence of someone who consistently responds with patience, empathy, and respect creates an environment where vulnerabilities start to feel less like exposure and more like connection. Slowly, the avoidant person begins to see that allowing another human being to truly know them does not diminish their strength. It deepens it. For the avoidant person, the realization of love rarely arrives in a dramatic or cinematic moment. It doesn't usually appear through a sudden declaration or an overwhelming rush of emotion. Instead, it often emerges quietly, almost unexpectedly, through a series of small realizations that gradually become impossible to ignore. The avoidant individual has spent much of their life maintaining emotional distance. They have learned how to keep relationships at a level that feels manageable, where feelings do not grow. 2. Deep and expectations remain limited. This approach has allowed them to move through life with a sense of control. They decide how much of themselves to share and when to step back when things feel too close. But when love begins to form, that sense of control starts to shift in subtle ways. At first, the avoidant person may simply notice that one particular individual occupies more space in their thoughts than anyone else. They might find themselves remembering conversations, replaying small moments, or wondering how that person is feeling during the day. These thoughts appear naturally without effort, and that alone can feel unusual. Over time, these moments of awareness begin to accumulate. The avoidant person may notice that they look forward to seeing this individual more than they expected. Their presence feels calming, familiar, and strangely grounding. Conversations that once might have felt draining now feel meaningful and even energizing. Yet the most powerful realization often comes when distance enters the situation. Perhaps there is a period of time when the two people do not speak as often, or circumstances temporarily separate them. During that space, the avoidant person begins to notice something that challenges their long-standing belief in emotional independence. The quiet that once felt comfortable now feels different. Something seems missing. This absence creates clarity. The avoidant person begins to recognize that the connection they share with this individual is not easily replaceable. It is not simply companionship or routine interaction. It is something deeper, a bond that has quietly woven itself into their emotional life. In that moment, the truth becomes difficult to avoid. They realize that this person has become important in a way they never intended or planned. The feelings they tried to keep contained have grown beyond their usual bound. Aries. What began as curiosity or comfort has transformed into attachment, care, and genuine affection. What makes this realization powerful is that it often arrives without resistance from the heart itself. The mind may still attempt to analyze or question the situation, but emotionally, the avoidant person already understands what has happened. They have fallen in love. The realization may come during an ordinary moment, a quiet evening, a familiar conversation, or even a simple memory that brings a sense of warmth. There are no dramatic signals or external confirmations. Instead, there is a calm, undeniable awareness that this person has become part of their emotional world. For someone who once believed that keeping distance was the safest path, this awareness carries profound meaning. It represents a shift from protection to acceptance, from emotional isolation to connection. And in that moment of truth, the avoidant person understands something they may never have expected, that allowing someone into their heart has not weakened them. It has expanded their capacity to experience life more deeply than before. Thank you for taking the time to listen and reflect. May these insights inspire courage, deeper connection, and a heart open to the power of real love. Goodbye for now, and may your journey ahead be guided by wisdom, growth, and the beautiful strength that comes from choosing love.